On December 6, 2025, 26 seconds into the main co-event of UFC 323, the Flyweight Championship of the world changed hands, and nobody knew what to do about it. Some people called it a fluke. Some people called it controversial. Some people said the belt should have an asterisk. But if you actually knew Joshua Van's story, if you knew where this kid came from, what he'd survived, what he'd lost, and the very specific, very public predictions he'd been making for years, you'd understand that nothing about that moment was an accident. This is his story. To understand Joshua Van, you have to understand Myanmar. Not the Myanmar of travel guides and golden pagodas. The Myanmar that has been at war with itself for most of living memory. The Chin State, where Van was born, sits in the far west of the country, mountainous, remote, and home to a predominantly Christian ethnic minority that has faced military oppression for decades. Joshua Van Bawi Thong was born there on October 10th, 2001. His full name, Bawi Thong, is a Chin name. He was one of 5 siblings. He was 10 years old when his family left. They went to Malaysia first. It wasn't a destination. It was an escape route. Malaysia is not a signatory to the UN Refugee Convention, which means migrants from Myanmar exist in a legal gray area, without formal protection, without guaranteed rights, without stability. Van has never spoken about this period in detail, and I'm not going to fill in those gaps. When you're a displaced 10-year-old in a country that doesn't recognize your right to be there, you don't need me to explain what that feels like. What I can tell you is that they kept moving, because that's what you do. In 2013, when Van was 12 years old, his family made it to the United States. They settled in Houston, Texas, a city that is home to one of the largest Myanmar diaspora communities in America. Think about what that transition is. 12 years old, new country, new language, new school, new culture, new everything. You're a refugee kid in Houston, trying to figure out who you are and what this place is going to let you become. And then, 4 years later, when Van was 15 years old, his father died. The man who led that family across 2 borders, who got them out of Myanmar, who made it to America, gone. Van was 15. I'm going to let that sit for a second, because it should. Here's what Van did. He found fighting, not because he was angry, although he probably was, not because he was destructive, although he'd have every right to be, but because fighting gave him something concrete, a goal, a measure. A way to channel everything he was carrying into something that made sense. He started competing in MMA at 19. In 2023, at 21 years old, he signed with the UFC, becoming the first ever Burmese fighter to do so. And from the very beginning, he was telling anyone who would listen exactly where this was going. Here's a detail that sounds like a publicist invented it, but they didn't. For years before he ever got close to a title shot, Van had been signing UFC trading cards for fans with a specific inscription, not his name, not a generic message. Champion by 2026, he had the date on his phone screen. He had a custom pistol made that said, World Champion, December 6th. He told his best friend after a comeback win in 2024, this year, we're going to take over. By 2025, we're going to be champion. This is either the most confident man you've ever heard of, or the most delusional. The reason I'm telling you this story is because he was right. December 6th, 2025. Championship. Exactly when he said. But first, he had to lose. In June 2024, Van was knocked out by Charles Johnson. 3rd round. Cold. 20 seconds. It was his second loss as a professional fighter. He was 22 years old. And the path to the title, which had looked so clear to him for so long, suddenly had a very large detour in it. Here's the thing about losses like that. The physical damage isn't the hard part. The hard part is what it does to the thing you've been telling people. Van had been saying, I'm going to be champion, out loud, publicly, for years. And now he'd just been knocked unconscious by someone who wasn't the champion. A lot of fighters never come back from that. Not from the knockout, from the doubt. Van didn't stop believing. What happened next is one of the most remarkable runs in UFC flyweight history. 4 fights, 4 wins, 9 months. He beat Edgar Chairez, he beat Cody Durden, he beat Ray Tsuruya, he beat Bruno Silva in the 3rd round. each win, closer to the belt, each performance, more violent than the last. And then, in June 2025, Van fought Brandon Royval in a fight that set the all-time UFC record for combined significant strikes in a 3-round contest. 419 strikes in 3 rounds. Van won that fight going away. And then, and this is the part that still gets me, 3 weeks after that fight, 3 weeks, Van turned around and took his title shot, as if he had a date circled on a calendar, and he was not going to miss it. On December 6th, 2025, the exact date written on the custom pistol, Joshua Van walked out at UFC 323 to fight Alexandre Pantoja, one of the most dominant champions in flyweight history. The fight lasted 26 seconds. Pantoja's shoulder gave out. The referee stopped it, and the belt went to Van. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. He got lucky. Pantoja got hurt. It doesn't count. Here's what I'd say to that. Van caused that takedown. His pressure caused that scramble. He was the reason Pantoja was on the canvas. And injuries like that, they happen when someone is being put in positions they can't escape. But more than that, Van had been telling you this was going to happen for years. He had the date. He had the year. He had it written on a gun. And when it happened, when the belt was around his waist, the first thing he did was hand it to his mother. The woman who followed her husband out of Myanmar, to Malaysia, to Houston, who watched her husband die, who watched her son get knocked out on a canvas and come back harder than he was before. She held the belt first, and then Van looked into the camera and said something I don't think I'll forget. Not "I'm the greatest," not "I told you so," not a word about the doubters, just "now the world will know of us." That's a kid thinking about the country he left, the state he was born in, the people who never got out. At 24 years old, Joshua Van is the second youngest UFC champion in history, behind only John Jones, the first UFC champion born in the 2000s, the first Asian-born male UFC champion, ever. He eats McDonald's for breakfast every morning during training camp. He manifests championships on gun handles. He signs trading cards with dates that turn out to be correct. And he now walks into UFC 328 on May 9th as the reigning champion, as a plus 150 underdog in his own title defense. I want you to sit with that for a second. The books, the analysts, the community, they have looked at this kid's entire life story and decided he's the underdog. This is the same kid who escaped a civil war, who lost his father at 15, who got knocked out cold at 22 and came back and won the belt on the exact date he predicted. You think Tatsuro Taira scares him? You think anything scares him? I started this video wanting to do a fight breakdown. Stats, odds, round-by-round predictions. But the more I actually looked at who Joshua Van is, the more I realized the fight breakdown is almost beside the point. Because the most extraordinary thing about this man isn't his striking rate. It isn't the 26 seconds. It isn't the plus 150. It's that he knew. He always knew. And he went and got it anyway. May 9th, Newark, New Jersey. And I genuinely cannot wait to see what happens next. If this story moved you at all, hit subscribe and drop a comment below. Does Van's story change how you see this fight? I'll see you on the other side of May 9th.